want to welcome you. I'm Mary Elizabeth Giraldi with Creating Conversations Bookstore in Redondo Beach in Southern California, and we are delighted to be bringing you our last author event of 2020, which is Colonel Terry Virts, discussing How to Astronaut with Dr. Erik Viirre, and a quick run of house for those of you who may not be practiced with this platform. After Erik and Terry are in conversation for a while, they will take questions from attendees. The way to do that is to use the Q&A function on your desktop. That's going to be located down at the bottom of your screen. You'll see the two little dialogue balloons back and forth. We'll pull questions from those. You can also use the chat function to check in amongst yourselves. But if you have a question for us, please do put, or a question for our authors, please do put it in the Q&A, because that is where we will be watching for official questions. So once again, thank you all for joining us. Particularly, thank you for being flexible with our time change. It's 2020, so things happen. That's just the way it is. So tonight we are delighted to be having Colonel Terry Virts. His list of accomplishments includes being a test pilot, a fighter pilot, a space shuttle pilot, and the International Space Station commander. While in space, he took more than 300,000 photographs, making him a notable and accomplished photographer. That was more than on any other space mission. The images were used in the National Geographic IMAX film, A Beautiful Planet, which he also shot and starred in. And his first book, A View from Above, combined that photography with stories about space flight and about the perspective of the denizens of Earth and our place in the cosmos. How to Astronaut, the focus of tonight, reveals the often untold side of space travel. It's filled with 51 short chapters with "you are there" details, science made understandable and comprehensible, and just the drama of stories that only a very few people have experienced and possibly will ever experience. He will be in conversation tonight with our friend, Dr. Erik Viirre. Erik is a MD PhD doctor. He is the director and adjunct professor at the School of Medicine, Neurosciences, Surgery, and Cognitive Science at the University of California, San Diego. And in conjunction with that, he is the director of the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination. And the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination seeks to understand, enhance, and enact the gift of human imagination by bringing together the inventive power of science and technology with the critical analysis of the humanities and the expressive insight of the arts, all of which are things that we think Colonel Virts has insights into. So without further ado, I will turn the conversation over to the two of you. Take it away, Erik.
Thanks so much, Mary Elizabeth. Terry, it's a super privilege to be able to talk to you this evening on the other side of the planet in Dubai. And I gather that's why we had to do the little bit of a time change for our discussion, but we're happy to roll with it. And it's a super privilege to have you. So we got an important housekeeping question to get out of the way first. Are you Star Wars or Star Trek? Which is your choice?
Well, as a kid, I grew up with Star Wars. That was my era. But ironically, throughout my career, I've been a Star Trek guy. I was on Star Trek Enterprise. I was on the last episode of Star Trek Enterprise. I helped do a DVD. They did like a, excuse me, they did a DVD set, and I did the bonus content when I was at NASA, showed them around NASA. I ended up doing this shark diving, helped film the shark diving project. And Gene Roddenberry's son, was on this trip with me. So I've had all these kind of crazy, unrelated Star Trek things. But yeah, Star Wars is kind of my era.
I see. Well, I guess we'll forgive you for that. It's pretty neck and neck for that. So, um, wanted to start off with your first mission, your first flight when you were the pilot of the the Space Shuttle Endeavour on STS-130, and you had a really special payload, which I think had important implications for you and meaning. Tell us what you were carrying on the space shuttle and installed at station there on your first flight.
Yeah, so STS-130 was the final space station assembly mission. It took over a decade to build the ISS, and I was lucky enough to help finish building it. And we were the first and only shuttle mission to bring up two modules at the same time. So we had Node 3, which is this big living area. And then we also had the cupola, which is the coolest place anywhere for humans. It's this 7-windowed module. I ended up taking lots of pictures. They told me the most ever pictures from that place, and it's just awesome. It's like in the Empire Strikes Back, or no, yeah, Empire Strikes Back, I think. But Darth Vader is sitting in front of that big window looking out, and they have the big lightsaber battle. It's like that. It's not quite as big. You can't have a lightsaber battle in there, but it's a pretty cool place.
Gotcha. Well, so speaking of looking out, what I've noticed this summer in particular is that we've just had a spectacular view of the solar system. So
Hmm.
we've had every evening, we've had Jupiter and Saturn up through the summer, and then Mars, and they're just there for us to grab and go out and look at it. They're stunning, and to me, that even living here on the ground, it makes me feel like we're really part of the solar system. And can you tell? So when you're at station and you're looking out the cupola and looking out into space, do you see the solar system? Do you feel like you're part of the
Hmm.
sun and the solar system there?
Yeah, for sure. It has been awesome, by the way. Jupiter and Saturn are right next to each other.
Unbelievable.
They're
Yeah.
getting closer. Another few months, I think they're going to be right next to each other. And Mars too is right up there. So
Yeah.
it's been a pretty cool evening sky in the northern hemisphere. But in space, I wondered that because people are like, "Oh, you were closer to wherever than we are," and that's true by a few hundred kilometers, which is
Right.
like nothing in the cosmic scale. But there's no air and there's no city lights. So if you can turn off all the lights inside the station, let your eyes adjust, you can see billions of stars. It's just unbelievable how many stars you can see. In fact, I could never pick out any constellations. I know the basics constellations. I actually just got this really cool telescope that kind of automatically does astrophotography, and so I know my way around the night sky. In space, I could never pick out anything except for
Wow.
the planets. So you
Ah,
mentioned the solar system.
yeah.
The planets were all really visible. Jupiter is this big, bright, kind of yellowish, orangish thing. Mars is definitely red from space. Um, Venus is super bright, so you can pick them all out. Saturn's yellow, but the most interesting planet, which is ironic, I didn't expect this, was Mercury.
Hmm.
Because I think down here on Earth, nobody ever sees Mercury. It's you probably have buildings or trees near your house, and it's just not a planet that most people see. But in space, I saw it all the time. I took a bunch of pictures of it. It's just a little white dot next to the sun, but it was interesting to see it as something that most humans have probably never consciously seen Mercury and known what they were looking at. Um, but I saw it from space a lot.
So if you had you're at the station and now it's a bus station and you got that rocket, where are you going to go? I mean, I feel like the expanse is the one that gets me, where they're just
Right.
driving all over the inner and outer planets. I mean, could did it feel like you could do that when you were up there?
It does. It's like, hey, we could go there. We're floating already. We're already in space. It's just a little bit faster.
Yeah,
But if you look at the rocket equation, it's the tyranny of gravity.
yeah.
You just that little bit faster is really hard to get to. And it takes using chemical rockets. It just takes forever, which is bad for us poor humans who have this stuff called DNA that cosmic radiation can ruin. So I think we need to figure out how to do electric propulsion. There's a chapter in my book, How to Astronaut, about that. the things that we need to go into deep space. And I think at the top of that list is a nuclear powered, which generates lots of electricity.
Yeah.
And you can use that electricity to make electric propulsion to go fast. And so it makes a trip to Mars a 1 year round trip instead of a 3 year round trip, which is a lot, a
A
lot
long
faster.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, how long were you on station when you were the commander?
That was a 200-day flight.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So I understand sometimes the hardest part of the flight is coming back to Earth. What was that like for you?
Yeah. The coming back to Earth is that if President Obama asked me that when we went to visit him in the Oval Office, and it's, you feel heavy and dizzy. Those are kind of the two feelings that I felt. Um, I remember I was the last guy out of the space shuttle on my first flight, and they came in. They said, "All right, it's your turn." And I went to hand them my helmet, and I was like, "Ugh, be careful! This thing weighs 500 pounds." It just felt really. Everything felt super heavy. That night I went to bed, and I felt like I remember thinking, "I'm a superhero," and there's some evil guy below my bed with a magnet ray that's got me pinned to my bed and I can't escape. Like I was just plastered to the bed. And then the other thing is dizzy. It's like it's not a glass of wine; it's more like a bottle or two of wine. You're just really does not feel good. You're super dizzy. I never got sick, or I was able to stand up and walk around and do everything. It just wasn't fun. I hated it. But that went away really quickly.
Huh?
On my long duration flight, they do this balance test where they put you in a box so you can't see anything, and then they shake the box, and they measure your foot response. So if your feet are if the force sensors are on off on off on off on off, you have bad balance. If it's really steady, you have good balance. And they did a balance test before 200 days, and they did one the week after I landed. And my score a week after I landed was better than it had been before I launched, which was
Wow.
amazing. Yeah,
Wow.
it blew me away. But I guess my body was made to go into space and come back to Earth.
Well, you just keep telling them that.
Yeah, exactly.
I gotcha. I gotcha. Well, and ironically, my specialty as a physician is inner ear disorders, and
Oh wow.
yeah. So, and I work with the flight surgeon John Clarke, actually.
Hmm.
Um, my patients experience. So I can tell them it's what it's like being an astronaut coming back to Earth. That's what they feel. They feel this whole dizzy, off balancy thing, but they get better too. So we can incentivize them like the astronauts.
Yeah, that's a
So
fascinating subject.
yeah,
Balance.
yeah, and one of those things that we learn a lot about our life on Earth by going to space. So,
Hmm. Yeah,
so I'm
you take away one aspect in a way that you can't really take away. You can't take away gravity on Earth,
yep,
and you can do that. You can take that ability to sense. Is that the somatosensory, the feeling of force?
that's right, exactly right.
Yeah,
Yep,
yeah.
good for you. So I'm the director of the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination. So speaking of gravity, Sir Arthur, you remember he was the author of 2001 and proposed nuclear-powered electric propulsion drive to get to the discovery to Jupiter.
Hmm.
And he was a gravity technologist. He invented the geosynchronous orbit. Um,
Wow.
so yeah, an amazing guy, and that was in World War II when he invented that.
Right.
So uh, an amazing guy and a writer, and you're trained as a fighter pilot, and a test pilot, and a pilot of the space shuttle. So how does a guy like that end up writing books? You said that you were telling us that you were thinking about writing fiction. Where does this impetus to write this book? What did you want to tell us by preparing this book?
That's a great question. In high school, I'm sure I was the least likely to write a book. I got C's in English. I tortured my poor English teacher, and whenever I was writing a term paper, it's like, how many pages does it have to be? And the second I got to the
5,000
character
words
for the
were
last page, I was done. Yeah, so it just was not my cards. But as I got older, I realized kind of that communicating, so speaking and writing, is the most important thing. I used to think it was just the science and technology that mattered, but if you can't communicate it, you don't have any impact on people. And when I was in space, I think the most important thing I did of all these experiments I did, I think helping to make that IMAX movie, A Beautiful Planet, was probably the most important thing I did while I was in space, because millions of people are going to see it. Like millions of people will be impacted by that. And so I just really enjoyed it. I did my first book with Nat Geo. I kind of fell in love with writing. The first book was kind of my starter book, but this book, How to Astronaut, is a word book. It's not a picture book at all. So it's like a real. I feel like I finally done a real book. It's kind of like a marathon. I did the rock and roll marathon, and
Uh-huh.
it was great. And then I went back and did it again after I got as an astronaut. I flew out there and did it again. And then I felt like I was a marathoner after I'd done my second marathon. So like
Nice.
after you do your second book, I feel like, all right, now I'm a real author. But I wanted to tell the story of space travel, of human space flight,
Uh-huh.
because what I did not want to do was write another astronaut memoir.
Mm.
There's 100 of those. That story has been told. We all kind of have the same story, so I did that doesn't need to be rehashed. So I tried to make it accessible for folks. I broke it up, like we talked. Mary Elizabeth said, I broke it up into 51 short essays, so it's very bite sized. You can each chapter is a few minutes, 5 or 10 minute read. It's not War and Peace by any means. And I just try to take different aspects of space travel. A lot of them you'd expect. We can go through the table of contents. Some of them you probably would not expect. And the goal as an author was to try to make you laugh and say wow. So it's not technical at all. This is not. I use all the different NASA acronyms and I make fun of all of them. In parentheses, I give the English translation for what this crazy acronym means. So it's something for men and women, for old and young. It's not limited to the space nerd niche, if you will.
So what's a surprising thing that that we might glean from a chapter in your book?
Let me see here. Chapters in the book. Um, Here's one. What to do with your crewmate's body if they die? That's
Okay.
something that
Uh-huh.
I you know.
Maybe a little
There's
too
a
on point for us right now, but okay.
there's a chapter about time travel.
Okay.
Um,
Tell us.
well, there's this thing called relativity and
Yep.
Mr. Einstein. So I talk about that. I'm actually yeah I am younger than I would have been had I not flown in space. Is I think the proper way to say it.
Yes. Like
There's a
how much? Like a week? Like how long?
seven, according to the NASA physicist who briefed me on it, 7 milliseconds.
Oh, that's real. Like that's something that, your watch could time. 7 milliseconds, it's something.
It's measurable. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I told a friend of mine's an actress in Hollywood, and I was telling her, and she was like, "Oh my god, aging stops when you're in space. I need to go to space because for
Yeah.
that crowd, your age is very important." So anyway,
But
there's a
200
chapter
days
on
to save 7 milliseconds, that's pretty, yeah, that's a lot. So,
you have a long time to save a little bit of
yeah,
time.
you
Yeah,
gotta go a lot faster, I think, to really, which is,
the radiation damage probably makes up for whatever time you
wow,
save. Yeah,
there you go.
yeah.
That's how about, tell us another one. What's another surprising thing that we might learn in your book?
There's a chapter about bad bosses.
Okay. Well,
How to deal with bad
that's pretty
bosses.
universal, right?
A
So,
lot of this stuff, yeah. I
uh-huh,
talk about the how to be a crew medical officer. So I'm just a fighter pilot, but I had to learn how to be the crew doctor.
okay, so what was the
Um,
yuckiest
yeah.
thing that you had to do to learn to be a crew medical officer?
Well, one of my favorite things I ever did in my life was I got to go work at the emergency room and the operating room in Houston for a week.
Yeah.
So I went downtown the medical mile. It's one of the world's top medical facilities,
Yep.
and I like people came in. This one poor lady had her femur snapped in half because she had a car accident because she hadn't changed her tires. She was driving on bad tires and it popped. And
No.
this other guy was badly burned in a chemical plant accident. There was a construction worker that had cement dumped on him, so had it all in his eyes, and we were trying to take it out of his eyes. This one guy came in. He had a giant. It was like a small piece of pie was just cut out of his arm from his pit bull. And he was like, "But she's a good dog. She didn't mean it." And so I had to stitch him up. I was putting this big giant missing flesh back together.
Wow.
So uh, this was really amazing. We had a guy come in. It was a drug overdose, and uh, his chest was full of fluid, so they were unconscious, intubated. But we put a tube in the chest. I forgot what it was called. Basically,
That's
like
it.
a garden hose in
Yeah.
between your ribs, and it was a big ripping sound when we cut through the muscle. And it was like somebody turned on the hose. Water came shooting all over the ER. It was really impressive. I had to jump out of the way. I didn't know a body could have that much water in it. So
Well, you're
um,
being pretty graphic here, Terry. We'll have to dial it
I
all
was
down
excited
a
about
little
it.
bit.
I
Yeah,
was
well,
excited about it.
obviously, well, and so uh, having gone through medical training myself,
But yeah, you know,
yeah,
you've done
sure, I
more than that.
do,
Yeah,
and I have worked as an emergency room physician,
there
uh,
you go.
where you see strange things, but somehow that changes you. And I
Hmm.
guess what I'm wondering about is, you mentioned about looking down on the Earth and putting this amazing set of windows up there for all of us to see. And many astronauts have talked about this overview effect, about how somehow uh, they're being transformed. And you're telling us, you've done many things, flown airplanes and worked, as a crew medical officer and now as an author, but you looked out the window into space. Okay, do you have a sense of how those things changed you?
So it's a pretty profound thing to look back and see your planet over there and not be on it,
Yep.
and then stay there for half of a year.
Wow.
Um, so there's a couple things. I think for me personally, hopefully, I'm less of a black and white guy. Um, Things used to be very black and white. A lot of younger people are like that. When you get older, hopefully, you get wisdom and you realize there's gray and there's merits to both sides of whatever the thing is. When you see the Earth, you're like, that thing has been there for a long time. It's been there for billions of years. It's going to be there for billions more years. So the trials of Earth, the daily noise that we deal with, just doesn't seem that important. I think in general, for me personally, anyway, I would assume for most astronauts, but I'm not really impressed by celebrity at all. I like meeting famous people when I do, and it's great to see people who do impressive things, but I'm not like impressed by them because they're just people. It's hard to be impressed by us, internet influencer when you've seen the planet from outer space. So I think it gives you good perspective on celebrity, and the our culture overvalues celebrity by a terrible amount. Like it's really unhealthy, the extent that we do that. On my first flight, I landed. It was in space for 2 weeks on Endeavour. Got back to Earth. Did all my science checks and stuff. I finally made it to my hotel room where the evil guy had the magnet ray that was pulling me into my bed. And
Right.
so I turned on CNN. That's what you do when you get to your hotel room, right? And there was some talking head talking about blah blah blah, whatever the Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels and Kim Kardashian, whatever the thing was of the day. I don't remember, in 2010. And it was like fingernails on a chalkboard. It was making my head explode. It was so meaningless. And after about 30 seconds, I had to turn the TV off because it was so meaningless. And the lesson that hit me was, man, I was a couple hours ago, I was in outer space thinking these great thoughts. How can humanity come together and work together? And here we're just bombarded by noise. And that was 10 years ago. That was before these things came out. There's so much noise in our lives. You got to figure out a way to cut out the noise. And then when you see stuff, you have to use some wisdom and discernment to figure out what's real, because it just feels like there's so much noise and disinformation out there. We really need to be smart about what's real and what's not.
So again, thinking about humanity traveling out to the cosmos, that's something that Clarke talked about. What
Hmm.
do you what do you feel about that? Do you think we can do it? Can we somehow design ion drives and all the other things that we need for long duration missions,
Yeah,
and really go out there? What do you think?
I think we can. I mean, I lived in space for half a year. At the time, I was the second longest American, but now there's probably 5 or 10 other NASA guys who have gone up for longer than me. We've done a lot of
Let alone the
kind of meet,
Russians.
and the Russians have been. There's one poor guy when the Soviet Union collapsed. They didn't have a they couldn't afford a ride home, so he was up there for 440 days. I think Polyakov was his name, but um, so we can do that. But in order to get places, we need the propulsion. We have ion drives. We have electric propulsion on small scales on satellites, and we have for decades. We just need to scale it up to the human scale so we can move. But all those things require some political stability. So I've had a chance to brief Congress and the Senate. I've been to several White Houses. I just spoke at the National Space Council 2 years ago, and I told Vice President Pence that these plans are not about the rocket science. These plans are about the political science, because our founding fathers blessed us with these things called congressional districts and elections. So, every 4 years, the new guy wants to change what the new guy didn't like the last guy, and that's not a good way to run a space program. So we need to figure out a way to have some stability. The other political problem we have is this thing called COVID, which has just exploded our debt. And so it's going to be hard to find a lot of extra money to spend on NASA, as we have these trillions and trillions of dollars of debt. So I think the technical problems are massive getting into the solar system, but in some ways the political problems are even worse. And so, the good news is we have an amazing private sector that can do really great things, innovatively. Hopefully, in the long term, hopefully we can start to bring costs down. So I think there's hope for that. But I will say this, Erik. For now, we're all on Earth, and there's no plan B. So we kind of got to figure out how to take care of Earth and how to get along with each other. Because although I would love to go to other star systems, that ain't happening anytime soon. Those stars, as you know, are really far away. So we have to figure out how to take care of Earth and how to get along with each other down here.
And a critical and important sentiment. So switching, trying to be a little bit cute here, you were talking about the commercial sector. Now, one of your crewmates on STS-130 was Bob Benken, and he just came back from a really sweet ride. So you've flown all kinds of aircraft and spacecraft, but are you kind of like jealous of Benken? He got to ride, SpaceX and the Crew Dragon. It looks like a pretty awesome rocket. What do you think about it?
He did. I think it's a pretty cool thing. Look, the test pilot in me would love to fly other vehicles and stuff. The thing about the SpaceX rocket and the Boeing capsule also that'll be launching next year, they're both fully automated, so there's really nothing to do. The astronauts,
it's like a can in there. You just you push the button and it goes. Is that what happens?
You are spam in a can. You feel a launch, and then all of a sudden you're floating, and then 24 hours later you die.
Joystick or anything like that.
On a SpaceX, there's not even a control stick. I think the Boeing has a control stick, but you don't really use it.
That's for sure.
But the Soyuz was pretty much automated too. That's why, as the pilot in me, loved flying the shuttle, because I actually got to fly the space shuttle. It was amazing.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, so going backward a little bit, here in San Diego, we have the Air and Space Hall of Fame, which is super fun. And hopefully we'll induct you into it one of these days.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, and it's amazing events. And through that, I had the good fortune of being able to meet some Apollo astronauts, including Neil and Buzz. And last year you did a tribute project. In fact, you're wearing the shirt. But what I wanted to ask you about was did you guys sit around a campfire at the outpost and sling beers with the Apollo guys and say, "Oh, you shuttle guys, you didn't even know what it's like. We were at the moon." So, did you get to talk to Apollo astronauts, so the moon travelers? I mean, the amazing accomplishment, right?
Yeah, it really was. I mean, that's what motivated me to be an astronaut. It was the first book I ever read was about Apollo, so that whole program was just awesome. Um, so I've had a chance to meet a lot of the Apollo guys, maybe all the living ones, almost all the living ones, if not. There's this annual Apollo Gala at the KSC, or there has been until this year,
Mm.
every July, on the anniversary of Apollo 11. So I've met a lot of folks through that. I'm a member of the Explorers Club, so I've met folks at the Explorers Club, um, just at different projects. I know Charlie Duke pretty well. Um, I know Buzz very well. He wrote the forward, excuse me, to one of my books. I know Jack Schmidt, and I've Walter Cunningham. So I do know those guys. I was just at Joe Engel's house the other day, helping him hang some trophies. He's a hunter, and he's got some stuff from back in the 1950s. Who were one of my astronaut classmates, and I were helping him hang those in his new house. So, um, I mean, they're amazing men. They really are. It's a different generation.
So
Guys like that are not around anymore.
was there like a special story that, oh, that so and so told you that, or a chance that you got to ask somebody, one of the Apollo astronauts?
One of the most amazing stories. Charlie Duke was coming back from the moon, and the Apollo guys had to do EVA or spacewalk, um, going to and from the moon. So not they did them on the surface, but also going to and from. So they open up the hatch. They're flying home from the moon. They're in the middle of deep space, and he he had lost his wedding ring on the moon. He couldn't find it. He didn't know where it was, and it was time to leave. So they left. And as they're flying home, the hatch is open. I think they're running umbilical for that EVA, and all of a sudden, he sees this wedding ring floating out of the hatch, like out into space, and he wants to grab it, but it was too far away. He couldn't reach it, so he just watched it. And his crewmate was outside. They were retrieving camera, like film, I think, and this wedding ring like hit the spacesuit perfectly on edge, like not like that, but on edge, and then bounced straight back in, and it came directly back to him, and he reached up and grabbed it, and it put it in his pocket or whatever. So that's
Wow.
like the most amazing, because I know how things float, and it's to get something to bounce off of something in the right direction is impossible, especially a round ring. So that was his I don't know, divine moment in Apollo. That was a pretty cool story.
Wow. Well, in fact, we will take questions. A few of them are queued up already. So if you haven't, if you got a question, go to the Q&A button on your screen, and we'll see about getting to them. But since I'm thinking about it with that story, our host Mary Elizabeth had a question for you, which is, what is the equivalent of stubbing your toe in space? So you mentioned things bouncing off. So I mean, are you bouncing your head off? What's the thing that you do that's like stubbing your toe when you're up in weight?
So the way you stand, if you will, in space, we have these handrails, which are these metal bars,
No.
and you grab the bar. That's how you move around. You're constantly grabbing these things and moving around. But when you get somewhere, you need to stabilize yourself. So you wedge your feet underneath of them, and kind of this part of your foot, the top before your foot bends, that part can get really sore because you're constantly wedging it under metal bars, and that's not fun. But
Mm.
the stubbing your toe part is just hitting your head on those handrails, because
Uh,
especially rookies, or like we've had some space tourists that have left a lot of blood and flesh on the station, where
uh,
if you move too fast and you're too jerky, you'll bang into things, and you don't see something behind you, so it's really easy to bang your head on those on those handrails. So you have to be careful about that. Normally at your house, you don't bang your head on the ceiling, but in space you can.
I see. So we were talking a moment ago about Apollo 11 and the tribute, and I was super fortunate last year to be at KSC for the 50th on July 20th last summer.
Oh
In fact,
wow.
because I had a mission, a payload that was going to space station, the first Clarke Center payload going to space station, which was carrying stem cells. And in fact, our second mission is coming up, which I'll mention at the end. Um, but you did a really fun, cool project. So let's talk some pilot stuff. Um, and you did another tribute, another circumnavigation
Mm.
Tell us about that. And we see the logo on your shirt here, One More Orbit. Tell me
Yeah,
about.
this was an amazing project. So a friend of mine, Hamish Harding, I had met him at one of these galas 4 or 5 years ago, and he was talking about this project he wanted to do, where we would take an Apollo astronaut and we wanted to set a world record. So we were going to circumnavigate the globe over the North and South Pole, because that's something that's only been tried a few times, and bring an Apollo guy along to like promote aerospace and promote awareness and celebrate the space program. And I was actually going to go get training. I had a class date and everything at Gulfstream to fly a Gulfstream G650. That was the airplane that we wanted to use. It can go really far and it can go really fast, and those are two good qualities when you're trying to set a world record flying around the Earth.
Uh-huh.
And it didn't happen. It got delayed. And then finally last year in the spring, Hamish said, "Hey, it's going to happen." By that point, there was no time for me to get trained to be one of the pilots on the mission. So he said, "Why don't you make a movie?" Which is exactly what I want to do anyway. I want to move into the TV and film universe, and this is just what I want to do. And so I got to work on making this movie. By that point, last summer was not the summer to bring Apollo guys with us because they were
Mm.
so busy with the 50th. Every single one of them was maxed out, and we tried some. I know some famous actors and so on. Everybody was busy filming or whatever, so it was just us on the mission. I got to come up. So I ended up directing this film, One More Orbit. So I had to come up with the story. I had to come up with. We had to put together a team. The James Nyhouse was my director of photography. He was the IMAX DP for all the IMAX movies for the last 30 years, and um, so anyway, it was fun. We had a editor, like a proper Hollywood editor. Spent a few months editing this movie. I had my own music. I had to interview different musicians, and so I had to work with them on making a soundtrack for the film. As a first time director, it was such a cool experience. Like I got to do everything, very eye opening. And now it's out. It just came out last month. It's on Amazon, on iTunes, and pay per view everywhere. So it's pretty cool to have a real movie out that people can download, and it's on IMDb and everything.
Wow,
Um,
congratulations. Yeah.
it's and it's kind of the way I look at it. It's kind of the 2020 antidote for 2020
Mm.
because it's positive, it's fun, it's the adventure of setting this world record. What it At a deeper layer, just like good science fiction. Um, Science fiction has lasers and aliens and spaceships, but that's just like the framework. A good science fiction has something deeper, right? You're talking about man woman relationships or race relations or international relations, whatever. There's always a deeper meaning in good science fiction. Star Trek had all those issues that and it's like a safe zone. In Star Trek, they could talk about those things in the 60s, whereas you couldn't just openly talk about it. But if there's an alien and a laser gun, it makes it, you can talk about deeper things. So the deeper meaning in One More Orbit was about how exploration can bring people together. Certainly Apollo in the 60s, it was a divisive time to say the least, but it did kind of bring the world together for one moment. And on One More Orbit, we had 10 different nationalities flying on this Gulfstream, and we got along great. I talked about the environment and kind of a way to reverse climate change. We were talking earlier about the North Pole. As we
Yep.
flew over the North Pole, there was a lot of water down there and cracked ice, and there was not big ice sheets. And so I have a chapter or a section in the movie about how to solve climate change. So anyway, it was a really fun project, and hopefully it's a fun movie. It's the antidote for 2020. That's the way I describe
I
it.
see. Well, at the Clarke Center, one of the great privileges we have is that we are the host of the Clarion Science Fiction Writers Workshop,
Hmm.
which is the preeminent science fiction writers program. And we've here at UCSD, we've had it for the last 14 years out of its 40-year history. And it's pretty special. We've had amazing people: David Brin, Kim Stanley Robinson, Ted Chiang, Octavia Butler. All kinds of people got their start in science fiction. So you'd mentioned earlier, you were thinking about writing fiction. So I think we'll have to maybe get a sample of your work and kind of test drive you and see whether you might qualify, and come to our summer camp for science fiction writers and see what you can do. So which would be super fun. You've done several books. You did a very special one around Apollo 11. Tell us about
Hmm.
that one.
Yeah, I've got a copy of it here.
Uh-huh.
So again, Hamish and I, the guy that we did One More Orbit with, uh, another friend of mine had this idea of reproducing the Apollo 11 flight plan, which is like the couple hundred page checklist of from start to stop, everything you do on a mission. I had the same thing on my space shuttle mission. It's the same font, a lot of the same acronyms. It's amazing how similar the flight
Wow.
plans were.
Uh-huh.
NASA just kept them going. So we reproduced this thing. There's a company called Book Arts. Let me grab it.
So it's like Nico and Seco and Tidris and
Yeah,
all those kinds of stuff. Uh-huh.
it
Wow, look
comes
at
in
this
this.
book.
It comes in this clamshell book, and it's amazing. Sorry,
Wow,
it weighs
gorgeous,
it
gorgeous.
weighs it weighs 17 pounds, so it's like seriously heavy.
I'm totally
Um,
telling you, I got to get one, man.
yeah, it's amazing. The company, it's limited edition. We just made a couple hundred of them, and they're all numbered. But it's the company that does it does all the head of state gifts. I think they've done over 1,000 head of state gifts for the last 30 years. So when
Wow.
the president goes to visit the Queen or the Pope or whatever, they make the gifts. So it's spectacular. It's Italian leather and 23 karat gold. These guys are
Wow.
like they're artists. It's more of a work. It's not really a book. It's more of a work of art. But
Wow.
that was a fun project because I have a website called ApolloFlightPlan.com. So you can go through the flight plan, and there's all these like things you hover over a little red dot, and it explains what that uh, what MECO is, main engine cutoff, or SECO, single engine cutoff, or whatever the uh, MET, or they call it GET in the Apollo days, ground elapsed time, which is the
Uh-huh.
time from. So you can go through the flight plan and kind of learn what all these acronyms are and see when they landed on the moon, when they were taking off, when they were doing their EVA. And anyway, it was a really fun, very fun project.
Well, the movie Apollo 11, to me,
Oh
that's the
yeah.
best space movie. It's better than Star Wars or anything like
Yeah.
it. The Apollo 11 is just a stunning, stunning movie. And it's just rockets firing and firing and firing.
Yeah.
And they all worked. It was an amazing thing. Let's go for a trip, you know. So that flight plan must be an amazing. So you got to see some of the actual artifacts, right? Some of the actual flight plan pieces of paper.
You know what was really cool? I took this over to Gene Kranz's house a few months ago,
Uh,
and he
it was
is the
Gene
most
Kranz,
amazing. He was the flight director for
right?
Apollo, the Apollo missions. In
Yep,
Apollo 13, he was the guy with the crew cut and the vest, and
right.
Ed Harris, I think, played him. You
That's the
know,
one.
he's the failure is not an option guy, and
Yep.
he's just like this piece of American history. He was also a fighter pilot, and so I could just spend hours talking to him, and he remembers every detail. And oh, we had to, work on this computer program because this rendezvous radar wasn't working, or he just remembers all these details. And it was so much fun just to see his eyes light up as he was flipping through the flight plan. And he showed me his as a flight director, he had basically the flight, like the cheat sheet, all of his notes on this flight plan. So I did
Uh-huh.
see that, like the flight plan for the moon landing. It
Wow.
was so cool that the flight director used. He still has the paper copy of it. So
Stunning. Stunning.
that was real. That kind of made the whole project worthwhile. Yeah.
I gotcha. Well, let's take a few questions here. I did Mary Elizabeth's question. I have one here. So, how long did it take after 200 days in space to get your strength back on Earth? Were some muscles weaker than others?
So the good news is, when I was in space, NASA schedules you for 2.5 hours of workout a day. There's a chapter in How to Astronaut about this,
Uh huh.
and that exercise is on a weightlifting machine, a treadmill, and a bike. So between those three things, when I came back, they measure your bone density, which is an important thing because bones get less dense if you don't do anything.
Right.
And my bone density had changed 0.0%
Wow.
over 200 days. which
Really?
shocked me. And even the scientists were like, "Wow, that's not normal." But because I was so dedicated, I worked out every day, and I was taking vitamin D pills.
Mm,
It really did well. And then my muscle strength wasn't 100%, but it was probably 90%. It was pretty close. It's the day I landed, 24-hour trip from Kazakhstan back to Houston in a Gulfstream, and uh, I went straight to the gym. Was the first thing I did,
wow.
and man, I was dizzy. I could barely move. And we have a strength and conditioning trainers that started working me out right away. And the first week I was back, I did 20 pull-ups. So I wasn't 100%, but I was pretty close.
Wow. Wow. Amazing.
Yeah,
Uh,
it was. I was shocked.
so you mentioned dizziness. So our question here is, does everybody get seasick or space sick when they go up into a weightless environment? And then what happens if you get it?
Right. So everybody doesn't throw up. Maybe only 10 or 20% do, but everybody gets some type of that everybody feels it for sure on their first flight. On my second flight, I didn't. Like, as soon as I got into space, my brain remembered it. The neurons were wired somehow, and it knew what was happening. But for me, the first 2 days were miserable. I On my first flight, you could only move your head about this fast. Like, you can't just turn around. You have to move your head really slow. I had this raging headache. I was downing ibuprofen. It was kind of 2 days that were not fun at all. And I remember thinking, okay, so why did I sign up to be an astronaut? And then
Right.
the third day, it was like a light switch flipped, and I was fine. And then I had a big smile on my face for the rest of the time. It was great. But yeah, the first couple days kind of are not fun. Um, then on my second flight, I didn't feel dizzy, or my vestibular system had it figured out, but my back hurt because you actually grow a couple inches, because there's no, right now gravity's pushing me down, and it doesn't, so you just stretch out. um and that hurt, man. My back, I just had back pain. So they had these little camping chairs. It's called not a chair, and you can basically strap your legs and put pressure, compress yourself, and that felt really good. So I had to use that
Huh.
thing for about 2 weeks, and then after a couple weeks I was in good shape.
Well, maybe you're just genetically configured for living in space, man. That'd be
I It felt like it felt like, i'm I'm good to go in space. Yeah.
so. Speaking of which, it says we've seen pictures of life on the space station, but what does it smell like up there?
I was worried about that myself.
Mhm.
And actually, it doesn't really smell like anything. It smells like metal and plastic and computers, and it's a very sterile environment. Whenever a SpaceX or a Cygnus or Progress comes up, they'll send fresh fruit, and that's amazing. Like, the best part about that was just smelling it. Or I had two SpaceXs when I was there. The third one blew up, but the first two made it. And they had put oranges in there, which was really awesome. It was really nice of them.
Wow.
Problem was, the oranges had been picked like a few weeks before, so we didn't eat them. I'll just leave it at that. But they still smelled good, so it was just good to have these oranges, smelling up the station. Not, it doesn't smell like anything really. It does, unless you're exercising. Your Under Armour t-shirts get pretty stinky
Uh,
after about 1 or 2 days. But you keep those off to the side, and so overall the station doesn't smell like anything. Although space, like, okay, so here's one
yeah.
smell that's interesting.
Okay.
When a cargo ship comes and you open the hatch, or when somebody goes and does a spacewalk and you come back in, you can smell your spacesuit. There's a really distinct smell, and it's kind of like describing, like, what does a strawberry smell like? Describe that with words. um, but it's musty, kind of electronic-y. um, I guess is the best way to spell it. If I smelled it, I would know it immediately what it
Uh-huh.
was. And that was a really unique smell. And I think it's just, I don't know what it is. The extreme temperatures or the vacuum causes something to happen. I don't know what it is, but there's a very unique smell to
Well, maybe when you're making your space movies, you can have a smell-o-vision with a scratch and
it.
sniff orange and a scratch and
5D.
smell. Yeah, exactly. That's right.
Right.
Yes. Oh, here we have a good one. So we get the impression that life in space is highly planned and deliberate. We talked about the flight plans of, hundreds of pages with lots of back and forth conversations to Earth and great care. But was there a time that you had to act on the spur of the moment? You just had to do something that wasn't programmed or planned. Was there can you tell us a story like
Yeah, everything's planned out for sure. Well, one thing I wrote about uh, several times. We had an emergency. The alarm went off for an ammonia leak, and in the end, it turned out to be a false alarm. But we thought it was a real thing. And that's a bad emergency. There's basically three types. There's a fire, which
that?
makes sense. There's an air leak, which makes sense. And the fire alarm goes off every month or every few weeks because the Russians have some old technology that every time you kick up some dust, the smoke detector goes off. The air leak happens every once in a while. They've had a really, really small air leak for the last year, and I think they finally narrowed it down to one of the modules. But the ammonia leak had never gone off, and that's the worst one. That's the most dangerous one. They told us if you smell ammonia, don't bother doing the procedure because you're going to die. So when that went off, we ended up in the Russian segment. We came back, and the entire day was shot, and they had to have like a planning meeting to replan our schedule. Another thing that happened, with the Russian cargo ship, a Progress blew up. Also, we had a Cygnus blow up, a Progress blow up, and a SpaceX blow up in 8 months. So it was a bad year for space station planners that year,
Mm.
trying to keep track of our supplies. But when the Progress had its accident, it was on a Soyuz rocket. So the Russians wanted to do an investigation to make sure the Soyuz rocket would be okay for the next crew. So our replacement was delayed. And so they said, well, why don't you guys stay while we're waiting for your replacement? So we were stuck in space. We didn't know for how long. I wrote a chapter in the book in How to Astronaut about this, because being stranded in space was similar in a lot of ways to being stranded on Earth during quarantine. And
That's our
so
next question,
yeah,
which is,
one, yeah,
go
well, we can talk more about this, but one of the lessons I learned was the worst thing for any crew on a space mission, on an Antarctic expedition, on a nuclear submarine, you never want your crew sitting around bored, right? A busy crew is a happy crew. So they had to replan everything. We got to do a pretty cool activity. There's this module called PMM, which is a big storage cabinet. It was the shuttle had these MPLMs, which were big modules full of supplies, and they went up and down with the shuttle. And when the shuttle program ended, we just left one there as a storage closet. So we had to move it from the bottom of the station to the side of the station, to the front of Node 3, in order to make room for future cargo ships. So we hadn't planned on doing that. It was a big task, but when we got stuck in space for a month, they moved that task forward. So we had to like learn how to do it, and it was a really big deal. But it was fun. It was good to stay busy
So sort of like
when you're in that
spring
situation.
cleaning in when we're in quarantine here. You kept yourself busy. You clean up and
Yeah.
a little
Well,
extra vacuuming and
it was more like building a deck or something.
okay,
It was a construction project more than cleaning. But yeah, it was good.
very good. Um, so someone I know is asking about the balance system again, and
Mhm.
about what do you mentioned being off balance and that you did really well. What do they have you do to regain your balance, and how is this something that I can tell my patients about recovering the balance, because it comes back, right?
It does. So it's still a bit of a more art than science, I think.
Mm,
That's a mysterious system. Uh, I will say it's amazing how well designed we are. The space shuttle has these things called ring laser, or F-16 had ring laser gyros too.
yeah,
It's a rate sensor in three different axes, right? So you can tell if you're pitching, if you're yawing, or if you're rolling. Well, the inner ear has the same thing. The canals are
yep,
three different axes, right?
that's right.
We have visual. You can see things. That signal goes to your brain.
Yep,
We have somatosensory, which you can feel things. Right now, I can tell my butt's on the chair, and so if I close my eyes, I still feel force, so I know that down is that way.
yep,
So if you lose one of these three systems, and then you have the inner ear thing. So if you lose one of those, the other two can make up. As long as you can see, you can make up for a problem in the inner ear. But in space, you lose the somatosensory. You can't feel
Mm.
anything, and if you close your eyes, um, you're just down to your inner ear, and your inner ear is tricked. It doesn't know what's going on because there's no gravity. The little cilia hairs that the fluid moves doesn't know what's happening. So
Yep.
I felt this is interesting, Eric. You'll like this. For the first couple months, this went on for months. Every time I closed my eyes, I was immediately pitching forward and rolling left.
Um,
It was like I can still feel it right now. I can remember this sensation, and then I'd open my eyes and it would stop immediately. So something about the way my inner ears are made and the hairs are bent or whatever was sending that signal to my brain. It was pretty interesting. But the way to when you get back to Earth, and I don't know if it helped. I think it did. Our strength and conditioning guys would make us stand on one of those like upside down hemispheres, so it kind of wobbles, and
yep.
that forces your body to balance yourself. And then they would throw medicine balls at us. So I remember I'm like, dude, I just got back from space and they're throwing these giant things at me and I was trying to catch them. So you kind of I worked really hard at it. And I recovered pretty quickly. But
Wow.
the first day was rough. It
I got you.
was not fun.
Well, we're coming up to the top of the hour, so I'll finish our questions with the nice one, which is, what is the most beautiful thing that you've seen in deep space?
That one is so hard. I mean,
Mm.
the Earth, everything about it. The name of
Uh-huh.
our IMAX film was A Beautiful Planet, and it really
Yeah.
is. Yeah, I think maybe if I had to pick one, it would be the aurora,
Uh-huh.
because I've never seen it on Earth, and
Uh,
it's so spectacular. It's so alien. It's like not normal. This green, and you can see it's like a river of plasma flowing, and you can see it flowing in real time, like with your eyes. And our eyes are designed to work black and white at night, color in the day. But even though it was nighttime and the aurora sort of looked gray, they'll also look green. Like your eyes can perceive the green. The cool astronaut pictures make them seem really bright green, and your eye doesn't see that, but you do see dim green and red too. The top part is red based on the chemical of the upper composition of the upper atmosphere. But it's basically solar particles hit the magnetic field. They get funneled into the North Pole or South Pole. And the South Magnetic Pole is interesting. It's not 180 degrees out. It's like
oh.
150 degrees out.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know that
Uh,
until it was summertime and winter in the southern hemisphere, and I saw the southern lights, and I was like, "Wow, they're right there." So I looked on Wikipedia, and it turns out the magnetic poles are not 180 degrees. So
wow.
the
That's,
southern, yeah, it's over near Australia, which is a
uh-huh.
lot closer. It's closer to our orbit than the North Pole is, and the North Magnetic Pole. And um, this one night I was going through the southern lights, Aurora Australis, and I remember it was like this giant green cloud that we just flew right through the middle of. It was the most, and so I just floated. I just sat there looking out the window. I was all alone. It was the most amazing moment, and I remember thinking, I feel like I'm in a Star Trek movie when they go through the nebula, you know.
Yes.
And the good news is there was no Klingons to attack us on the other side, but it really felt like I was, because we were completely surrounded by this green glowing plasma. It was pretty awesome.
Well, there was a special Star Trek goodbye that you were able to make. Tell us about that as we're wrapping up here, Terry.
Um, so, well, help me out because I've done a couple
Oh,
of Star Trek
Leonard
things.
Nimoy.
Okay, one of the other many Star Trek
Yes,
connections that this is the biggest one by far.
sure.
So we're doing 3 spacewalks in a week. I'm super, super, super busy. It's the day before the final one, so everybody's tired, and the third and final spacewalk is very different than the first two. And I get an email from the NASA Public Affairs. Hey, Leonard Nimoy passed away. So Mr. Spock had died. Can you do something? And I didn't know what to do. So I went down to the cupola and I got a picture of Live Long and Prosper. And I had to get the focus on my hand and on Earth and the lighting of my hand and for Earth. And it was a big deal. I got the picture and I just tweeted it, no words, no nothing, just tweeted this picture. And it got so many hits. It was retweeted millions of times, just super popular. A lot of people know this picture. They don't know me. It wasn't about me. It was just about Leonard Nimoy because he was so beloved. He was such
Yep.
a important part of our culture. So that was a pretty cool. That was like an honor to get to do that tribute for him.
Well, good for you. Well, such
Yeah,
an honor to talk to you, Terry. You got a great future ahead of you as a movie director and a book writer,
I
and so
hope.
we look forward to connecting you up. So thanks so much to Creating Conversations for having us. Check out the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination. Just Google Imagination UCSD, and you'll get to our website. And Terry, again, thanks so much. It's a real privilege. Live long and prosper, and I hope we'll get to meet you real soon when the epidemic's over. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me on. This was fun.
Thank you so much, both of you. And not that anybody can tell, but FYI, I am actually wearing my Star Trek 50th anniversary Klingon colored lipstick for the occasion. So thank you for bringing it all full circle. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight / this morning. We really appreciate and value your time. Take care, all.
Okay.
Night.
Bye.
Bye bye. Thanks.